Hello and welcome back to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, and with me this week, as ever, we have Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And we're delighted to be joined by, from the MCC Brussels, Jacob Reynolds.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. We've got loads to talk about this week. The Democratic National Convention is in full swing. We'll be discussing Yvette Cooper's two crackdowns on extremism and immigration. And finally, we'll ask if a building can be racist. So, the Democratic National Convention is happening this week. Kamala Harris, by the time this goes out, will have been officially nominated as the Democrats' presidential candidate. There's been a lot of talk about how joyous Kamala's candidacy is. It's worth perhaps reflecting on the fact that she's the candidate without ever having done a major interview. She's not really announced a policy platform. We're not really clear about what ideological direction she wants to take the party in. And of course, there was no primary either. But Tom, are you feeling the joy nonetheless?
I'm not, but I dare say I'm not the main target audience for it. But I mean, you do. It has been fascinating, the kind of gap between the enthusiasm and the reality. I mean, Kamala Harris is basically just a sort of quite empty husk of a machine politician. I mean, when she ran for the presidency last time around, all of her program was all very left wing, because then Sanders was in the ascendancy rather. Now, this time around, she's trying to strike a much more kind of centrist note and basically trying to say very little at all really about what it is that she plans to do. As a kind of individual over the years, even if you just want to say, okay, maybe this is just kind of Barack Obama style star power, that's definitely not there. If you look at, you know, the few times that she has been in the public eye and given speeches, she talks like a kind of malfunctioning motivational poster generator. Like, it's things that almost are groping at something vaguely profound but never quite get there.
Unburdened by what has been.
Exactly, all of that stuff. I forget the full quotation. We'll probably only butcher it, but it's things like that. Like, it's looked like she's kind of like trying to make stuff up on the fly after having about 3 or 4 glasses of wine. That's the kind of vibe that you get. Not particularly impressive individual. You know, in the Biden administration, it was kind of widely seen as a bit of a failure. Was given the border issue as something that she was really supposed to head up, and now she's trying to completely deny that she had anything to do with it whatsoever. And up until 5 minutes ago, she was seen as such a liability that they would rather put the cadaver up than have her have a punt. It was only after the debate with Trump where Biden, you know, was just stood there with his mouth hanging open that they thought, I guess we'll have to give it to Harris then. And then suddenly, she's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You've got to admire the message discipline, but the hollowness of it is incredible, especially when this is someone who's going to potentially be the leader of the free world. Yeah,
no, it's extraordinary. And the Obamas were both there on stage this week and giving their hearty endorsement of Harris. But we all know that they were reluctant to endorse her. That's why Barack Obama took his time before coming out in her favour, possibly thinking, who the bloody hell else can we get? But yeah, Jacob, what have you made of it?
Well, yeah, I think as everyone's been dubbing it, and Brendan had a good article on this, on the vibes election, trying to turn this into nothing but just a feel-good kind of campaign message, the making heavy use of the iconography of the United States of America, even though we know that those Democratic Party figures are probably very uneasy with that. But they've gone with this sense that all we're going to do is transmit a vibe. We're just going to basically say to you, in kind of the best traditions or the worst traditions of advertising, everything's okay. We're here to make you feel good. You can have this kind of joyous experience, enjoy yourself. You can identify with 3 glasses of wine aunt style Kamala. You can also identify with bumbling Tim Waltz and like his kind of faux chumminess, faux avuncular kind of thing. And it's this sense that there's absolutely nothing resembling politics at all, as we've noted. And in place of that, there's just this kind of cascade of cringe vibes that is supposed to wash over you and almost designed to put you to sleep. Turn off your critical faculties and just kind of accept that this is the way things have to be. And it makes for a very, very dispiriting contest.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you brought up Tim Waltz there. I mean, he's a fascinating figure in the sense that, you know, they are trying to present him as this folksy kind of almost like football coach or dad type figure, when actually, you know, you look at his record and he is, you know, on board with every just deranged woke idea possible, you know, turning a place like Minnesota into a woke haven. It's just completely bizarre, you know. Some of one of the funny, he's got this nickname Tampon Tim because one of his laws was that every boys' bathroom should also contain female sanitary products, and this is supposed to be the normal down to earth option here.
And especially given the fact that he coined the weird attack line against JD Vance and Trump and all the rest of it. There's nothing weirder than putting tampons in the boys' bathroom at a school. I mean, it's quite creepy, if anything, when you think about it. But it is interesting. Like, yeah, it is all about vibes. It is all about the superficialities. But it's also all about Trump at the same time. It's fascinating how all of the speeches, the unity, probably a fair share of the enthusiasm for Kamala as well, was just the fact that she's the one who's got a better chance of defeating Trump. And you just think without Trump, they really would have nothing to sort of cohere them around. It's certainly helping to mask some of the divisions which have come up around Gaza and other issues like that. But, you know, all like speech after speech is people getting up and talking about the threat to democracy, or the other side are, you know, banning books from school libraries, even though the books they're referring to are usually, you know, fisting materials or whatnot. It's without this kind of fear-mongered image of what America will be like under Trump, they've really got nothing. It's that or vibes.
Yeah, well, then, and it's ironic because, I mean, post-assassination attempt is like, if anything, Trump is like, seems a little bit like a husk himself. There's like, he's not out there kind of with his campaign messages. Lots of people are kind of saying, where's the populist energy gone from Trump? And it's like in direct inverse proportion to how much of a kind of figure Trump actually is now. He seems a little bit kind of emaciated version of himself. The kind of need for him grows ever more. And so as you say, what would they do without Trump? They'd have to invent him. But it's like, it's this complete negative style of campaign.
Yeah, and he's sort of struggling to find an attack line. I mean, I think he's now dropped this idea that, you know, attacking Kamala Harris for first being Indian and now presenting as black. I don't think that won over many people. But yeah, you're right. You know, it's almost like the more vacuous Harris is, the harder she is to attack in so many ways. I did want to talk briefly about something you mentioned there, Tom, which is Gaza. There are these protests happening outside the DNC. Obviously, people are thinking back to 1968 when there were the huge anti-Vietnam War protests outside the DNC, and they were cracked down very hard upon. This is very different. Obviously, the Gaza war, very different kind of war, different kind of, you know, the morals are very different. But what have you made of that, Jacob? I mean, they've basically, Joe Biden weirdly said that they have a point, even though a lot of them are going around calling him Genocide Joe.
Yeah, which bit does they have a point?
Yeah, well, it's kind of very emblematic of the way that so much of politics is kind of conducted as these kind of stale repeats of past things. And their legitimacy, if they have any, is so tied to these kind of cornerstone events, the student protests of the 1960s, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam, like all of these things are just invoked very much as hollow symbols now. And so they're desperate for something that feels and looks a little bit like that moment of kind of democratic energy or whatever it was, because complicated as that period was. And so they're trying to invoke it. And these comparisons end up ringing really hollow. Obviously, the numbers aren't quite there. This is hardly a mass movement in favor of Gaza. It's mainly a few student radicals, etc. So I think
there's about 3,000 people out, you know, at the peak of this week's protests, as opposed to, you know, low tens of thousands, you know, in the Vietnam War.
Yeah. And it really just speaks to they don't have any kind of particular positive vision. They've got no sense of any of the answers to the questions that face America, which are really tremendous ones. And so they're kind of groping around in the history books for something that might sound like something useful from the past to try and use that instead.
And Tom, you know, can you even call it a peace movement if they're chanting, you know, from the river to the sea, or saying we don't want a two-state solution, we want all of it as the usual, you know, as they usually do?
No, I see what you're driving at, and I completely agree. I mean, it is ridiculous. The way in which, despite all that's happened, and the way in which these protesters can even insult the democratic leadership and still be treated as on the right side of history whilst being basically pro-Hamas and all the rest of it is crazy. But they do. I think the problem is like because the Democrats, because of the superficiality of everything, all they've got is their moral authority. Any challenge to that, even a superficial one, or in this case a completely misplaced one, shall we say, because it's not pro-Palestine, it's pro-Hamas in many cases, they struggle to deal with that. I think anything that doesn't paint them as the good guys, the right side of history crew, needles them to an extent that is unhelpful, definitely.
Should we have a look at what Trump has been up to?
No, I would just do cocaine. So not just,
That's down and dirty, right?
Yeah, and this. I mean, it was.
But you don't anymore?
No, I don't do it anymore, man, and I'm not doing it.
Is it too much?
Some of the stuff started to get a real rattle in it too. I don't know where we were even getting it from in this country, but
so that was a bit of Donald Trump talking to Theo Von. He's been doing the podcast circuit. He's trying to appeal to a younger audience, I think it's fair to say. Tom, what have you made of it?
Well, he might have also if he is feeling quite low energy, he might have stumbled across the solution in that interview. But no, it is interesting. You're right. He has been kind of taking the sort of more online route. I mean, these people, including Theo Von, have huge audiences.
Yeah.
And can certainly reach people. But it'll be interesting how much that can kind of filter out from that world into the real world, as it were.
But it seems as if like there's almost a recognition in the Trump camp that he hasn't got much to say anymore. And so I think they're hoping that by association with some people like Elon Musk or like this podcast, that something might kind of almost come out of it. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with going on the podcast circuit. As you say, these people have got huge audiences. That's great. But it speaks to a little bit of this thing that you suspect that the kind of key figures in the kind of Republican Party are just a bit too online.
Yeah.
And they think that just by appealing online, that can make up for the fact that the kind of populist policy energy is not really there.
And I can't help but think that that's what's driven a lot of some of JD Vance's weirder comments about, you know, insulting cat ladies or whatever it might be. These are just things that you say when you're shitposting on the internet, not if you're about building a serious populist movement.
And it's like the mirror image of what happened to the left, you know, increasing years. And the right, as we've seen on both sides of the Atlantic, falling prey to similar sort of impulses, you know, everything from echo chambers to audience capture and so on, and kind of forgetting where ordinary people are at, as you guys have been saying. Even like, remember when Ron DeSantis had his disastrous launch, which he did on X, even though it was not a tried and tested platform for that kind of thing, was another kind of reminder of like, you need to, touch grass a bit more.
Yeah, log off.
Yeah.
This episode of the Spike Podcast is brought to you by Shopify. Now, one of the best ways to become independent is by starting your own business. But turning your big idea into a thriving business is a lot of hard work. Luckily, there's a really great way to help you get started. And it sounds like this. Yes, that's the sound of another sale on Shopify. Shopify is the groundbreaking all-in-one commerce platform that can help you launch and grow your very own business. Shopify supports businesses like yours across the globe, whether you trade in bass guitars or Cuban cigars, by simplifying how you can sell goods both online and in person. Turning your dream into the real deal has never been easier. Shopify helps businesses like yours by bringing everything under a simple, intuitive dashboard. This makes managing orders, taking payments, and responding to customers almost effortless, giving you more time to focus on the big picture. Don't worry about losing your hard-won independence either. Shopify's huge suite of customization tools and online courses will help you constantly adapt and improve. With Shopify, the ultimate direction of your business will always remain up to you. So why wait? Take the leap towards freedom and get started with Shopify today. Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. So let's talk a little bit about Yvette Cooper. Earlier in the week, she launched a counter-extremism strategy. Later on, she launched a counter-illegal immigration strategy. Let's talk a bit about the extremism first. I mean, Tom, one of the things that struck me is that she says she wants to counter harmful ideas.
Yeah, and misogyny was the focus of it, extreme misogyny,
yeah.
So this review, or I think that she dubbed it a analytical sprint or something like that, which is a fantastic technical.
Worst kind of management speak.
So we're all waiting for the analytical sprint. We'll look at the usual things of Islamism and the far right, but also this focus on these nefarious trends, particularly focused. The one that was singled out was extreme misogyny.
They're going to need some more adjectives, aren't they?
No. How extreme are we talking? Naturally, just there's Andrew Tate pictures are plastered over all of the news reports because the supposedly hypnotic hold this character act has apparently over our young men, and I think it's already got her in for a fair amount of mockery, you know, and it's part and parcel of this tendency of when you take an issue like extremism, the tendency of certainly the liberal left, who are now in government firmly in the ascendancy, is to try and downplay the main issue, which is Islamist extremism, or to change the subject onto issues that are a bit more comfortable talking about. Up until this point, obviously, that was the far right, which, despite the horrendous scenes of recent weeks, remain a fraction of the terror threat if you go by attacks, body count, or MI5 caseload. But now it seems like there's been this attempt to kind of bring other forms of just a nebulous sense of extremism into the mix. I mean, we've seen it recently with the misogyny issue, a kind of ongoing debate about whether kind of incels are a nascent terror threat. I believe the authorities already collect data on prevent referrals on an incel basis, but it's quite a small proportion, as you can imagine. And this seems like the continuation of that. But I think more than anything else, these things are often a bit of a displacement activity. They can have authoritarian consequences in terms of bringing more and more forms of harmful speech into the crosshairs of government. But I think it's often a product of the fact they'd rather not talk about where the vast majority of this threat comes from, because that's a bit uncomfortable as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
They'd rather beat up on Andrew Tate and get some headlines. It seems like another example of that.
And isn't there a danger of, continually casting the net wider, not just in terms of, the authoritarian implications for that, for free speech and things like that, but also, we hear time and time again, whenever there's a major atrocity, the person is often known to the authorities, and yet nothing seems to have been done. Nothing actually seems to have been preventing them. So surely there is a cost as well to tracking some, dateless wonder who posts on 4chan.
Yeah, well, I mean, that said, they seem to be quite eager to lock some of these people up. Like, if you say something bad, you do something bad in the real world, as people have been cataloging on Twitter, like X, for a little bit now. You say something bad or do something bad in the real world, you probably get slapped on the wrist. You say something bad online, is all hell breaks loose. But yeah, that sense that the authorities, and the great article on Spike cataloging some of this, the inability to get to grips with the sheer fact that when the system not functioning the way it should, when people should be removed from the country for breaking the law, etc., so much just it seems to, and is a nebulous phrase, they fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
And there's, as you said, that when they cast the net wider, it seems to get worse. But it also seems that this is the kind of elite's only way of getting to grips with these things. The only way that the reality of kind of violent sexual offences committed maybe by migrants or maybe by anyone, but the only way it can get through their kind of reality field is if they catalogue it as misogyny. I was reminded a bit in the wake of those infamous New Year's kind of mass groping sessions in Germany, in Cologne and elsewhere. Like, the only thing that anyone can say is, oh, this just shows we've got a real problem with misogyny. It's not that we've got a problem with our borders or a problem with integration or anything like that. It's that the only way they can catalogue it is under these kind of nebulous terms like misogyny.
Or as Jess Phillips did at the time, liken it to people just getting wolf whistled on Broad Street in Birmingham on a Friday night. So, they can even downplay it on its own terms. But it's just on your point, Fraser, about casting net, it's like they're quite happy casting net so wide it catches everything but stops absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And you have seen that with the failures which have taken place in relation to Islamist extremism, which let's not forget, 95 people have been killed since 2005 and 7/7 due to Islamist attacks compared to 3 in far right attacks. It's not to say you should pick and choose which flavour of nihilistic violence you're more concerned about, but you clearly see where most of the resources should be trained on. And yet there has been this disparity. The Shawcross review, another review last year, was published and noted that basically what was being considered Islamist extremism by Prevent was drawn far too narrowly, and what was considered extreme right-wing extremism by Prevent was drawn far too broad, to the point he even suggested, mildly controversial right-wing commentary points were leading for, teachers to suggest that a pupil should be referred to this program, which is about stopping people from being drawn into terrorism. This should be very serious. The last set of Prevent referrals numbers that they had, it was something like 11% were for Islamism and 18 or 19 were for the far right.
Yeah.
It's crazy disparity. And it completely doesn't match up with the people that MI5 are having to deal with, which the vast majority of that caseload is Islamist. Now, regardless of the criticisms you might have about Prevent, is a very dysfunctional and a liberal system in a lot of ways, that it's quite clear that the one thing you don't want to do at the moment is to flood the whole counter-extremism system with loads of Andrew Tate fanboys or something like that. That's obviously not useful. And also, there's been many of these attacks, whether we're talking about the murder of David Amos, the Readings stabbing, all these people were on the radar of the authorities. Salman Abedi, MI5 were given information that he might have been involved in a bomb plot, but it slipped through their fingers. This is clearly, there is an issue of focus here, even if it's not completely a zero-sum game. You would think that all of your energies would be focused on where the main threat is, and yet it's not, for reasons of just looking good on social media rather than anything more serious than that.
Well, it kind of fits in, doesn't it? So, obviously MI5 and the regular police are separate, but there's a kind of broad sense that what the kind of authorities are really good at is cataloguing things, but not very good at actually dealing with them. So you have your phone snatched or something in the street, you ring up, you get a crime reference number, but you know that there's no way in hell that anything's actually going to happen. And similarly, we've moved to this kind of almost like cataloguing state. It can track, it can monitor things online, it can generate all these files, but can it actually keep the peace or enforce law and order? No.
This episode is also brought to you by AG1. Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen a hell of a lot of conflicting advice out there on how best to get healthy. Self-declared experts are constantly telling me which supplement to have, and you end up with thousands and thousands of different things you're supposed to take on a daily basis. But I soon discovered AG1, and that makes my life incredibly simple. AG1 is a daily nutrition supplement that makes it easy to stay on top of your health. Just one scoop contains 70 high-quality ingredients, all designed to meet your physical and mental needs. I usually drink AG1 alongside my breakfast. All I do is mix one scoop with water, and in less than a minute, I'm all sorted. That single scoop of AG1 is packed with some incredible ingredients. Pantothenic acid helps you stay sharp, folate can help reduce fatigue, B vitamins can help strengthen your heart, and vitamin A can do wonders in keeping your skin, hair, and nails healthy. The most surprising benefit of AG1, though, is how much it has supported my immune health. The vitamin C and zinc in my morning scoop have helped to make regular colds a thing of the past, giving me way more time to just get on with life. AG1 is also designed by a world-class team of scientists with more than 100 years experience between them. That's why it's trusted by Olympians, F1 drivers, and countless ordinary people too. So if you want to replace your multivitamins and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription. Just go to drinkag1.com/spiked. That's drinkag1.com/spiked. Check it out. Let's talk a little bit about Cooper's immigration crackdown. She's promised to get deportations back up to where they were around 2018. Actually, possibly that's not that hard. I mean, it's worth remembering that the last Conservative government actually deported far fewer people on average than the new Labour government, despite us now retrospectively seeing that government as a sort of happy-clappy open borders. It wasn't really at all. But Tom, I mean, what have you made of this? I mean, clearly the system there is dysfunctional because there are many people who, should be deported, people who commit very, very serious crimes and yet seem to somehow remain in the country, seem to be at large and able to commit further crimes.
No, absolutely. And I think what we're seeing here is a classic, again, sort of technocrat brain response to it, which on the one hand is that you're first of all just setting a very achievable target, as you say, getting back up to 2018 levels. It's something which people who know about these things say is very achievable. But if you look at, in terms of the backload that you might be dealing with, I think there was a piece in Telegraph estimated it will barely touch 1/10 of the problem, even if everything goes perfectly to plan. So very managerial politician of setting themselves a perfectly achievable target and then glorying in it, even though it hasn't really solved the problem. But also the underlying issues as to why you can have people like Abdul Azedi, the acid attacker in South London, who is, turned down for asylum, gets a fake conversion to Christianity after he commits a couple of sexual offences and is allowed to stay to then commit this horrendous attack on a refugee woman, we believe, as well. That fundamental problem is not going to be solved by meeting a target. It's going to look at how are people able to launch these legal challenges? Why are so many of them being accepted even when they're quite clearly spurious? Therefore, you have to look at something which is a complete third rail for Labour-right politicians, which is our human rights framework and the way in which that has been abused beyond any measure of what it was originally designed to do, to allow dangerous people to continue to pose a threat to the public. You would have to have a conversation about the ECHR trying to get around it, if not actually campaigning to leave it, which would be unthinkable from this particular government. But they don't want to do any of those things. Setting a target is easy, particularly when it's an easy target to meet. But fundamentally, they're not willing to do any of it. And it's also been quite interesting how even this modest target, which, considering some of the cases we've seen recently of people who really have no right to be here, and any sane person recognises that, the fact that even now there's still people attacking Yvette Cooper for this relatively modest target and suggesting, she's just aping Suella Braverman and whatever, shows you the problem, which is that Labour's social base is completely blinded on this particular issue and will continue to be so. Well,
people are saying Cooper is basically, encouraging the riots, encouraging the far right by simply saying we will have some border enforcement. I mean, to bring up some of those cases, some of the most recent cases. I mean, this week, a man was sentenced to 11 years in prison because he stabbed his own immigration lawyer. He had just been let out early from prison. That was on his 11th offence already. By the time he was stabbing his lawyer, he had already been charged with something else, another assault charge. Again, this is someone from Eritrea. really should have had no right to be here, really should have been, kicked out after the first offence, but was just seemingly allowed to, rack up as many as possible. There was another man from Kurdish man. Again, why was he here? This was his 12th or 13th offence, I believe, when he pushed an elderly gentleman onto the tube tracks at in Oxford Circus tube because he was given a dirty look. Again, why are these people here? Why have they been allowed? Why have they been essentially allowed to run free, run amok when they've committed such serious crimes? It's as if the public safety doesn't matter at all to the authorities. What matters most is, fulfilling these people's human rights.
No, it'd have been good if some of these people had kind of been connected with far right hate speech online, and maybe they might have gone somewhere. But the point is there's this kind of really dangerous mix of what seems like complete institutional incompetence. And as we say, this kind of like soft approach is giving into the kind of spurious human rights claims and all the rest of it time and time again. But a lot of time it just looks like the system that's been built up and gerrymandered and all the rest of it over time is just simply not capable of cataloguing and removing people when they commit serious offences as they're supposed to do. And time and again, whenever kind of the government reviews the law or takes a look at what they're supposed to do, the answer is clear. These people, if you commit a serious offence, you should be thrown out of the country. And so it doesn't happen. And this kind of this dangerous mix that no one will get to grips with. But we saw the Tories had no appetite for getting to grips with it, and we know that no matter what Yvette Cooper says, she's certainly not going to get to grips with it either, even if she might be able to rack up a few deportations to just kind of tick the box.
Yeah, definitely.
And not going to get to grips with extreme misogyny either, because I've been fascinated by that whole discussion. It seemed to focus entirely on Andrew Tate, but completely ignore even just the discussion of it. It's completely ignored the fact that it's now acceptable to punch women at the Olympics and things. It's incredible, but you don't expect any more from them, really, do you?
Or the extreme misogyny of Islamists.
Oh, absolutely.
The extreme misogyny
there was that
of trans activism.
Was it Haitham Al-Haddad was invited onto BBC Radio London recently to hold forth on the rights. This is a bloke who advocates stoning women to death for adultery. Yeah. And yet he was brought on as essentially a kind of community leader.
A highly respected imam, he was described as by the BBC. There you go. Right, so can a building be racist?
Yes.
Yes. Well, at least that's the conclusion of the people in charge of Welsh Libraries. So CILIP in Wales have told librarians that when they're organising their anti-racism training sessions, apparently they must do a lot of them for them to generate a whole report about this. They should avoid venues with links to colonialism and the slave trade. Now you might think, what venues have links to colonialism and the slave trade? Helpfully, the Welsh government has actually produced a whole report on this and has given a colour-coded sort of system of, if it's red, then they're very, very racist. No, sorry, it's red if they're named after someone directly culpable for slavery and colonialism, and then there's amber, and then there's green. Tom, what have you made of this?
That blacklist is amazing. It's like a whole spreadsheet people can check out. And I think my favourite example was they go down the list and they talk about the whole village of Nelson, which only gets an amber because it's actually named after the pub in the village called Nelson, rather than directly named after him. So therefore, it gets off.
Once removed.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's a village of 4,600 people.
4,600,
all been
racists.
Condemned as racist. You should not go there if you're a librarian.
It's so fun. I mean, especially it reminds you what a grift this is as well. So this particular report, which is I think the plan of it is to tackle systemic racism within the Welsh library sector. So they've got to have all these training sessions for the staff and whatnot. It's like £130,000 project, I think. And I know that's money down the back of the sofa as far as even local government is concerned, but I'm sure you ask any Welsh person, they'd rather that was spent on a handful of care workers than like forcing Mfanwy from Merthyr Tydfil to interrogate her white privilege every so often. It's absolutely crazy. But this has been going on for some time now, and it's again, all of this is basically a sort of legacy of the BLM mania. The original audit of all of these racist localities and buildings was something which was initiated, I think, in 2020. It certainly came out around 2021, and we're still living with the consequences of that, which at the very least is, whilst it's quite expensive, is a non-stop source of amusement. Because it's overreached to such a degree that I think almost anyone serious knows that this has gone too far now.
I'm just fascinated by the idea that people thought that there was a serious systemic racism problem in the library sector, and that little old librarians need to be re-educated.
That's where the main problem.
Or that the job of librarians is not to make sure that the public have access to books that they might read and kind of find interesting, or I get some ideas from or take home. But instead, no, the job of librarians is to make sure that they're carefully curating the libraries to avoid any kind of anti-racist content. You wonder how, I mean, I haven't been into a library in Wales, but you wonder if you like try and go there, and they're probably taking some of these books, like they're subtly kind of, I don't know, moving them to the back, or if they're always on these anti-racism trainings, you wonder for the kind of the actual purpose of what libraries is, which is to allow people access to information, and the degree to which even that kind of imperative to control what people think and see is kind of permeated into even such quaint things as like local libraries. Is it shows you how far the rot has gone.
Definitely. And we should say it's a lot of this is in response to direct response to government policy. This is part of the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan 2030. Yeah. So Wales is promising that by 2030 it will have eliminated all racism and it will be officially a systemically anti-racist country.
And they're starting with the libraries.
But they're also, this touches on basically every aspect of Welsh life. So it includes nursery and childcare facilities, child play centres, doctors' offices, public transport. If you can think of it, if it touches the Welsh state in some way, it has to be anti-racist and scrubbed of, of the racist legacy, allegedly, of Wales. There is no limit to this, is there, Tom? I mean, there's no, No,
not at all. I mean, it's the whole ideology is kind of softly totalitarian, like quietly totalitarian. It must touch absolutely everything. There is a sense that no venue must be rid of any of this kind of propaganda, that there's no space for it not to exist. And whilst it's all kind of a bit tin pot, a bit silly, the impulse behind it is ridiculous. And I think what you also see in a place like Wales is, it's not to say that like Welsh Labour are like at the top of the party are obsessed with this stuff and can quote you chapter of verse of Robin DiAngelo and whatever. But the problem is all this is outsourced to these kind of grifters / ideologues who make a pretty penny just propagating their insane divisive ideas on an unsuspecting public. And so you get the effect of all the divisiveness and all the toxicity without it necessarily even being intentional. Almost, they just see, this is a nice anti-racist thing to do, so we'll farm it out to these people and do it. So it's often why you see the distro between often quite boring politicians ordering quite insane things to take place. It's because
Mark
they're not
Drakeford
really.
initiative.
No, exactly. Who was insane in many respects.
But also boring.
It's this kind of there's no book left unexamined mentality that probably the only time lots of these people pick up any of these tomes is to kind of examine whether there's something racist content lurking. But it also speaks to look, there are plenty of decent arguments for devolution or all the rest of it, but it speaks to the way in which this has just become a mechanism for all of the worst kind of ideas to enter into our discourse. The Welsh government setting up some kind of task force or some kind of group, and they don't have maybe kind of really serious powers over what goes on in Wales. And so there is this kind of element of people inventing things that they have to get obsessed about because that's what justifies the Welsh government's existence. It's not that it might make lives for people in Wales better. It's not going to improve the economy or anything like that. But
or for the 6% of non-white Welsh people.
Yeah, it's not there to do that, not to deliver any of the kind of traditional things that government's supposed to deliver, but instead you can kind of sit comfortable. Even as you're driving along at 20 miles an hour, you can know that you're happily in an anti-racist country.
You just lost your job at the steel mill, driving at 20 miles an hour, but it's all good.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back next Friday. If you hit subscribe and click the bell, you'll never miss an episode. And in the meantime, why not check out all of Spiked's other videos and podcasts on this channel? And for more Spiked content, find us at spiked-online.com.